Welcome to today's research briefing on CRF's latest report, Building a Future Fit Workforce. We're really excited to have you here for this new format of event, which gives you a chance to get up to speed with our findings in a quick lunchtime session. I'm here today with CRF Research Director and report co-author Gillian Pillans, who's going to discuss the key conclusions of the research, which investigates how organisations are preparing for the future of work through reskilling, upskilling and redesigning work and working practices. To give some context, the report is based on interviews with more than 30 organisations, as well as data gathered from our industry survey, and we'll share sort of some snapshot results from those and case studies through today's session. Before we start, I'd just like to take a moment to share a thank you for report co-author Nick Dalton and also our partner sponsors APS, EY, Lane 4 and Mercer for their contributions to the report. And just some housekeeping, so for those of you tuning in live today, we'll have some time for questions near the end of the half hour, and you can put your questions in the chat throughout the session as they come to mind, and we'll circle back on those at a later point. So without further ado, given that we only have a short time together today, let's get into the discussions. So Gillian, perhaps you could give us some context to the reasoning behind the report and why it's such an important topic to be focusing on at this time. Obviously, COVID's played a really big impact in part and had long-term effects on working practices, but there are a number of other trends identified in the report that have been accelerated by the pandemic as well.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thanks, Grace. We were actually thinking about this before the pandemic even hit in 2020, and I think our last in-person meeting before we all got locked down was to discuss this research. So really what's behind the thinking about this is in the report we talk about a triple whammy that's facing organisations. So on the one hand, you've got skills shortages in certain parts of the workforce. So that's driven partly by the ageing workforce, which is leading to a shrinking of the working population in basically most of the, if not all of the major economies in the world. And on the other hand, you've got scarce skills. So in areas like digital and cybersecurity and some of these sort of areas where organisations, everyone's competing for the same sort of talent. So that's the first part of the triple whammy. The second part is organisations are seeing surpluses in some of their legacy businesses. So whether it's the impact of automation, technological change, jobs are changing, there's disruption, operating models, business models are changing, and that has fallout in terms of skills that are now out of date, and organisations have to think about how to handle that. And then the third part of the triple whammy is really the context, which is about the shifting role of the organisation in society. So I think we're seeing a change in expectations around how large employers in particular should be thinking about their response when they have surpluses of workers. So there's an increasing amount of pressure for companies to do the right thing by their workforce. And one of the points we make in the research, we talk about sustainability. And so clearly the sustainability agenda has been gaining ground in terms of the sustainability of the supply chain and companies' operations, but we're also starting to see that playing out in the talent space. So there's much more pressure for companies to operate in a sustainable way with regard to their workforce. So that's the sort of triple whammy that kind of underpins this research. I think there are a couple of other key contextual factors that we need to be thinking about, and again we talk about in the report. There are huge unknowns around the impact of technology. So we talk about technology, automation, and what that's going to mean for the workforce. And then the other kind of wild cards that we talk about is climate net zero targets, and what that's going to mean for companies, for employment, and for the workforce. So I think to summarise, really one of the key messages I would like to emphasise around this research is organisations need to build flexibility into their workforce, and there are many different ways that we can do that, which we talk about in the research. But being prepared for a very uncertain future really requires a high degree of flexibility and investing in that flexibility. So that's the kind of core message of the research.
Yeah, definitely. And just sort of taking where would you advise that organisations focus their efforts in doing that? What are the kind of building blocks in doing that?
Yeah, so I think there are 4 key points that I would emphasise around this. The first is you have to start with your business strategy, and for anyone who's familiar with our work at CRF, that's generally the point where we would start. So really thinking about where are we trying to get to as an organisation, and what are the critical capabilities that we need to build in order to execute that strategy. So that would be the first one, and how you actually do that. The second point would be really how you translate business strategy into specific actions around talent. Is strategic workforce planning is absolutely essential to that. So we published a piece of research earlier this year around that, and just going through, really practically speaking, how you can get from business strategy to really understanding what the required capabilities are and the different options around developing that. I think the third point is, before even getting into thinking about reskilling or anything like that, is actually to think about the design of jobs, the nature of work. So there's a process to go through in terms of thinking about what are the options for automation. Could we break jobs down into their constituent tasks and perhaps reconfigure them in different ways? So that's part of the thinking as well. And then I think the fourth point is something about having really good data on the skills profile of the workforce in order to understand the gaps between where we are today and where we need to get to. So, and this point is really important because our research found that the biggest barrier that organisations are facing around this agenda is the quality of their skills data around the workforce. And actually only 11% of respondents to our survey felt that their workforce skills data was fairly or highly effective. So, major mountain to climb, I think, for many organisations in this regard. And we also found that it's something where organisations are really active at the moment. So 1 in 3 of our survey respondents are currently either developing or implementing some form of skills framework or taxonomy to help them, kind of understand the current skills profile and define what's going to be needed in the future.
Yeah, lots recognising that need to do that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, in the research, you present a really useful and practical model for organisations in building a future fit workforce, which highlights 4 different strategies that you've identified that companies can take and are taking. You can see the matrix and model up here on the screen now. I was wondering if you could talk us through that model and what kind of actions we might see organisations taking in those different parts of the quadrant. Yeah,
absolutely. So, as you said, we talked to about 30 companies, and then there's also, all the other sort of background reading and all the ongoing discussions we have around our network. And it seemed that there were sort of 4 strategies that emerged, and they are, we love a 2x2 matrix, so we managed to map that onto, 2x2. And one axis is we talk about focused and systemic strategies. So a focused strategy might would, as the name suggests, suggest particular job families or individual jobs or segments of the workforce who are affected by by changes going on. So that's perhaps where you're seeing the greatest impact of technological change or business model disruption. So really zoning in on those parts of the workforce where you're seeing the greatest effect of all the changes going on. A more systemic approach might involve, rather than being perhaps more prescriptive and deliberate about specific actions, is more about equipping the workforce to be prepared for the future. And what that means in practice would be, for example, communicating the workforce plan, so identifying these are our critical future skills, and communicating that to the workforce so people can understand this is where I need to be investing in my skills for the future. It might involve mapping job adjacencies, so looking at, we might have, 500 financial analysts today, and we can see that when we map those roles, we might need 100 fewer of them in 5 years' time, but at the same time, we're going to need 150 more data scientists. And we can see that there's a huge amount of adjacency between those 2 roles. So those are opportunities potentially for encouraging people to shift from one job family to another. It might involve paying for skills, for example, so incentivising people to develop new skills, and underpinning this a sort of culture of learning, which I can maybe talk about a bit more in a minute. So that's the focus versus systemic part of the model. And then we also recognise that there are some organisations whose focus is more internal, and others who have perhaps more of an external focus. So that's the other sort of axis is internal versus external orientation. And so internal would mean preparing people for jobs inside the organisation. So we're talking about redeployment of people from one role into another, sort of reskilling and upskilling. External, as the name suggests, means looking outside the organisation. So that might mean helping people prepare for jobs outside the organisation, recognising that there aren't sufficient opportunities within the business, and we need to get people equipped as well as possible for livelihoods outside our business. Or on the other hand, it might involve working with partners in the external ecosystem to develop shared solutions or to sort of co-create solutions around shared problems. So that for me is one of the really interesting developments in this space, is this idea of, we're all in this together. The solutions to the problems don't necessarily lie within the organisation itself. We need to be externally facing and looking outside to solve the problems. And just a couple of important points around application of the matrix. I mean, we put this together, and hopefully companies can use this to think through what are the business issues I'm trying to resolve, and what strategies could I adopt. But I think it's important to point out that any one organisation can be working in multiple quadrants at the same time. So you might be really focused on a specific problem in a specific part of the business, but you might at the same time be putting in place the tools and supporting resources to take a more systemic view. And just to go back to one of the points I made earlier, whatever approaches you take has to be rooted in the business strategy and where we're trying to get to as a business in the longer term.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like you said, the partnerships one's a really interesting one. There's some great examples of that in the report. And as I say, I've got some great case studies from the organisations you spoke to throughout. And it'll be great to hear some of the examples and case studies of that and how they fit in kind of where they're working in that model.
Yeah, so I can give a bit of a snapshot today, but what I would, if I can do a bit of a plug for our session next week on Tuesday, the 21st, we have a whole day event, and we've got case study presenters coming and talking from Unilever and Ricoh, which are two of the companies that we feature in the report. But just to sort of give a sense of what's happening out there in those different quadrants. So if we talk about Ricoh, for example, which is a company that historically has been focused on sort of printers and copiers, and its business model is shifting towards being much more of a digital business. What they did was put in place a program called Scala, which is designed to retrain engineers who might previously have been in office locations, sort of maintaining photocopiers and printers, to be sort of digital consultants. So that's a whole program that involves selection, retraining, redeployment. A program that runs over quite a long period of time to equip people for new roles and to give them the relevant job experience. And they're having a great degree of success in moving people internally to do that. One of the examples of the sort of external orientation is, so I talked about, and in the report we talk about preparing people for livelihoods, not just jobs. And so one example of that would be Severn Trent Water, the water company. They are actually investing in training plumbers for the local community. And that not only is beneficial in terms of the future career of those people who are perhaps exiting the business, but also it helps their supply chain because they're sending out into the community people who understand how the water system works, where the issues can come up, and hopefully their practices in the community that they will do things that will will not cause knock-on issues further up the chain in terms of the overall water system. So I thought, it's a really interesting example of really that sort of idea of sustainability of talent sort of coming to bear in real life examples. And then the other one I'd really call out is Unilever. So they've actually made 3 public commitments which have been made by their CEO, and they report on regularly in their updates to the financial markets. And there's 3 parts of that. So one is to reskill or upskill all employees to have a future fit skill set by 2030. That's the first one. Second one is to pioneer new employment models to provide all employees with flexible employment opportunities by 2030. So on that one, they've been running a pilot around a much more flexible model where permanent employees continue to be employed but have much more flexibility around when they work for the company, what sort of projects they get involved in. And the third one is to help equip young people with essential skills to prepare them for job opportunities by 2030. So that's really an externally facing programme to give people in their local communities opportunities, for example, to train as hairdressers or salespeople. So really working with the companies and products and helping them get kick-started in their careers. And I think this is a good example of the systemic approach we were talking about earlier. I mean, for Unilever, the foundation is the organisation's purpose. So they've significantly invested in giving every employee, putting every employee through a purpose workshop is what they call them, and the idea behind that is that every employee has the chance to think about what is their individual purpose, and how does that connect to the wider organisation purpose, and how can they live out their purpose in terms of their career with the organisation. And so one of the things that happens at the end of that sort of purpose workshop is employees will complete a skills review, which allows them to assess where they are today, what skills they might be looking to develop, and then to connect that to learning opportunities, to employment opportunities, to project opportunities within the business. And the way they do that is they've developed an internal talent market platform called Flex, and we talk about this extensively in the report. And that connects people within the business to opportunities, to put in practice those skills.
Brilliant. There's some great examples, and as you say, our event next week will pick up on those in a lot of detail as well. So it'll be great to see people there. Now, moving on slightly, the report has a subtitle, Reskilling and Rethinking Work. And I know we had some really interesting insights from our survey on this topic. And I was hoping you could share some insights about the challenges that organisations are really facing in that reskilling space and how they're tackling them.
Yeah, absolutely. So it might be helpful just to start with some definitions. So, when we talk about reskilling, we're talking about essentially preparing people to do a different job to the job they do today. And upskilling is perhaps more helping people grow within an existing role. So, lots of companies are looking to upskill people in areas like digital skills, for example. That's one of the really common use cases. And reskilling is, really hot topic at the moment. I mean, the World Economic Forum, they reckon that around half of employees globally will need to be reskilled over the next 5 years. I have to say, I'm slightly sceptical about those numbers, and we do put a dose of salt in the report. But it is, and it's clearly something that is important for CRF members as well. What we found in the research is that most organisations are still in the early stages of this. So we did find that 42% of respondents have some form of reskilling programme underway, and a further 20% are planning to roll something out in the near future. So, it's obviously a big topic, and Upskilling is slightly more common, so just over half, so 55% of respondents currently have some form of upskilling going on. So hopefully this report comes at a time when we can support members in their thinking about this. But we looked at some of the the challenges and sort of practical learnings from companies who are a bit further down the road on this, and we came up with a 5-stage process. So if you're kind of designing a reskilling initiative, then maybe you could use this as your starting point. The first is really around setting priorities and objectives. So I think it's about, again, back to the business strategy. Where are your biggest gaps between where you are today as a business and where you need to be? So really sort of focusing on those areas, developing the most strategically relevant skills for the future of the organisation. So that would be point number one. The second is we talk about the business case for reskilling in the report, and I think often some of the stuff we do in HR can be maybe a little bit fluffy and kind of certainly very difficult to have an accurate read on a return on investment. Funnily enough, this is an area where there are quite a few good examples of companies having, quite strong business cases. When you line up the potential cost of making someone redundant or hiring a new employee versus the amount it costs to invest in some sort of reskilling program, the business case really can come out quite strongly. And there's some good examples in the report of finance directors really kind of getting on board with this and being incredibly supportive. I think that the third point is that there needs to be some sort of assessment and or matching of individuals to future roles. So I think one of the big learnings from this research is not everyone can be reskilled into every job. So you need a sufficient match at the outset between the core skills that individual already has and the requirements of a future role. So one example would be we talked earlier about reskilling financial analysts as data analysts. There's a big degree of overlap between those different skill sets that you can then build on with appropriate sort of learning support and job experiences. So, and then the fourth point is really to think about how to integrate learning and on the job development. So reskilling is not about giving someone a couple of TED Talks to watch and then hey presto you're reskilled. There needs to be well thought through, well designed combination of learning interventions and on the job experience, and that might include mentoring, peer coaching, all those sort of things, apprenticeship type, traineeship type support. That's really important. So that's really thinking about both the learning and the on-the-job experience, how we deploy people into relevant roles, and then the final one is evaluation. So checking that programs delivered on their objectives.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to look in the chat and see if there's any questions from our audience at this point. So we've got a good question from Petra Tag in terms of research in terms of connecting the education system with skills gap and talent shortage. Petra says they feel there's a huge gap in the system with regards to helping navigate people into the workplace in tech and green industries as well. And they ask kind of what is the future there and how they can support that as an organisation. I mean, I totally agree, and we kind of had to draw the line somewhere in this research. It's already 50-odd pages, and we did have quite a few conversations around education system, and I think that would be something that follows on from this actually. But I think there's some good examples of organisations working with their local communities, working with schools, having outreach programmes. So I think that's one thing is everyone can do their bit in some small way. Every organisation, no one is necessarily going to solve the education problem on their own, but we can all do our bit, whoever we work for. And the other bit I think is for us in senior positions in HR. We can influence governments, we can influence industry bodies. I spoke to quite a few people who sit on
sort of industry future skills forums and so on. So that's one way that we as an HR community can actually influence thinking around this and sort of shape the future and be involved in that.
Yeah, I definitely urge people to have a look at our summer lecture from this year as well on that topic.
Absolutely, yeah. Richard Gerver had a lot to say on that, and I actually interviewed Richard for the research as well. So there's some real nuggets in there. Yeah, absolutely.
And an important point that was raised throughout the report was the kind of communication of efforts from organisations to employees to get that engagement and make sure they're aware of the agenda, the way that they're working kind of within that model and the approach they're taking. Could you share some kind of insights on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, this is one of the missed opportunities for a lot of organisations. And we found this in our research on strategic workforce planning as well. So only 3% of companies actually share their strategic workforce plan with the workforce, which, I know there are good reasons why, perhaps certain information is confidential, but if you're looking, particularly if you're looking to develop a more systemic approach where you put the tools in the hands of individuals to manage their own careers and manage their own future, you need to tell them what it is that you as an organisation, as an employer will value in the future. So, being able to, even share, the sort of high level, these are the skills that we think will be necessary to executing our future strategy, sharing the future strategic objectives of the organisation. What is your business strategy? Do you share it with the workforce? Do you provide signposts to, these are the skills that we think we will value in the future? So, absolutely having a communication strategy around this. And our research this time, less than a quarter of companies actually communicate, even in broad terms, how they expect the skills profile of the workforce to change. So, I think that's really a huge opportunity to start to, put the responsibility in employees' hands to start thinking about it and preparing for it.
Yeah, definitely. Critical area for success there. And in terms of, you've some great you've talked through some kind of step-by-step processes and models. In terms of the development of kind of HR capabilities to match that and the investment there, where will be the critical areas for HR departments and teams going forward? I think
one of the things that we noticed is, talking about redesigning jobs and, work design, job design. This is something where it's not necessarily clear where that falls within organisations, and I think that is an opportunity for HR to step up and build capability around this and really, partner with the organisation to understand, where is technology going to have a major impact on jobs. How can we design roles to be meaningful for people, to provide, development opportunities? So that would be one of the key sort of capability areas that I think is potentially a gap that HR can look to step up and fill.
Yeah. Great. Well, to kind of round things off, I wonder if you could give a kind of final insight for organisations now that are looking to get into this work or kind of in this work as to where you'd what advice you'd give them.
I think one key piece of advice would be to start small. Start somewhere where you can see there is, and it's back to that match between what we have today, that we've got perhaps more than we need, and the sort of skills that we will need to build in the future, looking for potential areas of overlap, and start small with a pilot and test and learn. So that would be really critical. And I think the other thing that's very important, and I think for me a key learning from many of the conversations we had, is it does require a degree of sort of program design and making sure that you're lining up not just the learning elements, but also thinking about deployment. How do we get people into positions where they can learn on the job, and they might be supported by sort of learning technology, learning infrastructure, learning resources, but they've actually got the opportunity to put those skills into practice. That's how people learn, and that's how people build new skills.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Gillian. It's been great to sit down and chat with you, chat through the report. It's a brilliant report that I think, as we've kind of covered today, is very timely and I'm sure will be very useful to lots of our members. Thank you to all those for joining us today. We'll be sharing a recording of today's session with the launch of the report, so you'll be able to come back and touch in with it as and when you need. And we look forward to seeing many of you on the event on Tuesday. So thank you very much. you.